From the Toronto Star, I'm Adrian Shung, and this matters. The National Advisory Committee on Immunization released a statement this week about vaccines, and almost immediately, many doctors were ticked off. The committee, known as NACI, says mRNA vaccines like Pfizer and Moderna are, quote, preferred over viral vector ones. Critics say this kind of messaging undermines what Health Canada, chief medical officers, and epidemiologists have been saying for months now, that there is no best vaccine. They all work, they're all effective. Implying that some vaccines are better than others can also drive vaccine hesitancy. Sabina Vohra-Miller is the founder of Unambiguous Science, an organization focusing on evidence-based information in medicine and pharmaceuticals. And Sabina says the decisions we make around COVID, and especially on vaccines, is all about weighing the risks and the benefits. How do we best weigh the choices in front of us? And we'll also talk about why some of the messaging on public health and vaccines needs to get better. Quick. Sabina, thanks for joining us and making the time.
Thank you for having me.
So let's get straight to NACI's statement on vaccines, which has been seen as controversial. The committee says mRNA vaccines like Pfizer and Moderna are preferred, that's their word choice, over viral vector vaccines like AstraZeneca and Johnson and Johnson's. When you heard that statement, what did you make of it?
I'll be honest, I am not a fan of the word preferred. I think that was a huge miss in terms of having this tier system going with vaccines. And frankly, it's because, NACI has said that you need to be looking at what your exposure risk is. You need to be looking at, what the COVID rate in your area is, whether you live in a hotspot area or not. And who lives in hotspot areas? They're predominantly racialized essential workers. And for people living in hotspot areas, we have been saying to get the first vaccine that's available to them. And that is now being inferred as though that they're getting a less preferred vaccine. And so having this tier system of vaccines is very problematic because of that. And we don't want people to be thinking they're getting an inferior or a subpar vaccine, because truthfully, every single vaccine is extremely efficacious, especially in preventing some of these really severe outcomes of COVID. So we really shouldn't be having a tier system currently that really chips away vaccine confidence.
Yeah. Do you think this muddies the water? Does it cause vaccine hesitancy, especially when healthcare is already trying to fight that with people? Do you think it complicates things?
It absolutely does. So, I do like the fact, and I do appreciate the fact that NACI has taken a very transparent approach. But what is lacking is, putting some of this information into context that people can understand and providing clear messaging. We need to empower people to make these informed decisions. And so being transparent is great, with that. And that is exactly what we need to be doing to build confidence. But what we're seeing is that the actual communication of this has been very haphazard and has caused a lot of confusion and a lot of chaos. So that for sure is a miss. I think what we need to be doing is going back and explaining what the risk benefits are of the vaccines and allowing people to make some of these informed decisions for themselves.
Yeah, so let's get into that in terms of the risk-benefit analysis, because you framed the question of should I get a vaccine and trying to answer it through that analysis. Essentially, do the benefits of me doing something, do they outweigh the risks? So how can people use that when they have questions about the vaccines?
So first of all, everything in life carries a risk. There is literally nothing you do in life that does not come with an associated risk. So we take calculated, informed risks every single day of our lives. Any single medication you take, you're making a risk-benefit analysis. Taking any medications in pregnancy is a risk-benefit analysis. Hopping into your car, driving to work, is a risk-benefit analysis. But we all take these calculated risks on a daily basis because the benefits outweigh the risks. And so, we have to put this into context. So what are the risks? What are the risks that we're talking about in this situation? So on one hand, you have the risk of this severe side effect that is very rare. It occurs in around 1 in 50,000 to 1 in 100,000 people. So that's on one hand with the AstraZeneca and Johnson and Johnson vaccines. On the other hand, you have the risk of COVID. And what is that? That is based on the area you live in, your age, your exposure risk, whether you're able to work from home, whether you work in an essential role. And it also factors in things like, if you bring COVID home, who all are you impacting? Do you live on your own? So are you the only one that's going to be impacted? Or do you live in a multi-generation housing? And could you potentially actually transmit COVID to 10 other people? And then also understanding what the long-term effects are of COVID. So we have long haul COVID. We also know that, having severe outcomes to COVID can leave you with long-lasting health impacts. So that is what we're looking at in terms of risks. What you have to do then is put that into your specific scenario. So where do you live? Do you live in a province like Ontario that is currently completely on fire with COVID? And what does it mean if you're actually going to delay a vaccine? So in Ontario, every single day that you decide to decline a vaccine means an extra day where you could potentially be exposed to COVID. And we're seeing this. We're seeing this with people who have gotten the vaccine and, within 7 to 10 days have been exposed to COVID, despite the fact that they, obviously it takes 2 weeks to get immunity to the vaccine. But it also just shows you that you can get COVID at any point. Even if you work from home, you have community transmission of COVID. Those are the risks that you really have to be weighing the benefits of the vaccine against.
So when we're talking about risk, the longer you wait to get your shot, you are increasing your risk of getting COVID and all the other side effects that would have, or potentially with your family members as well.
Exactly that. And so those are the risks that you need to compare against the benefits of getting the vaccine. And this is where it gets really interesting, because when we're looking at the benefits of the vaccine, we have to understand that the benefits of the vaccine, in fact, keep accruing. So as long as you actually have immunity to the vaccine, your benefits from the vaccine keep adding up. And we also have downstream effects of that. So these benefits are also afforded to the people that you live with, your close contacts. And so when we're looking at benefits, that's another thing we have to include into the equation. But when you're looking at the risks are A, individual, so it's just for the person, and B, it's in a specific point in time. So it's the first 3 to 4 weeks after you get the vaccine. And so that's really where these calculations get perhaps slightly complicated. And I think that what should have been done by NACI is that when they have put this information forward in a technical report that no one in the public is going to read, they should have tried to condense this into easy to understand information for the general public.
So that messaging that we've been hearing, to set the record straight, the messaging that we've heard about your best shot is the first shot that's available to you, that still stands. That is still the best medical advice out there.
Absolutely is, especially if you live in a province that is on fire. So perhaps I could take everyone through scenarios to better understand this. So for instance, you live in a province that has a lot of COVID. You go into a vaccine clinic, and at the vaccine clinic, you have your pick of vaccine. You can get whichever one you want. I mean, that's a very highly unlikely scenario, but just in case this occurs. And at that point, you would pick the mRNA because having a 0% chance of having this severe clotting side effect is better than the small increased risk of having it, right? And so you would pick the mRNA. But if you live in a province that has a lot of COVID, like Ontario, like Alberta, and the only vaccine that's available to you today is AstraZeneca, what do? At this point, every single day that you decline AstraZeneca means you're putting yourself and your family at risk of getting COVID. And what if, mRNA vaccines were going to come? Maybe it's a couple of weeks delay, maybe it's a month delay. Every single day then adds up in terms of your risk. On the flip side, if you live in a province where COVID is not very rampant, so somewhere perhaps like in the Atlantic provinces, and you have the luxury to wait for an mRNA vaccine without having the dire repercussions of COVID or being exposed to COVID, then basically NACI says perhaps in this situation, you might want to wait for an mRNA vaccine to be available to you. The issue here, though, is that we have no idea when things can get really bad. So Nova Scotia, as an example, has been doing fantastic throughout the pandemic, but we've seen in the last few days how that's changed really quickly. So, again, even if you live in a province where you don't have as much COVID, that only holds true for today, and that does not necessarily hold true for tomorrow. And so, again, you're taking into account the fact that you could possibly be exposed to COVID tomorrow.
We'll be right back. So when we're having these discussions about risk-benefit and the potential risks, and people hear about blood clotting, vaccine hesitancy obviously is top of mind for so many people. And the people who do have second thoughts, it often comes from a place of mistrust or a lack of good information, or it could be fear. Maybe it's all of those things. And I wonder, what is a good and productive way to have those conversations about vaccine hesitancy? Because it can be very charged, but how do you have productive conversations where it doesn't devolve?
I think the first place that we need to start from is a place from respect and compassion. And the reason why I'm saying this is because, a lot of people who are vaccine hesitant right now, vaccine hesitancy is a spectrum. You have, obviously, on one hand, the core anti-vaxxers, and those are not the people who I'm going to be talking about now. I'm talking about the people who are just concerned about these specific vaccines, because I never have we actually before gone from identifying a pathogen to having vaccines available and ready, manufactured and distributed within a year. So some people are concerned about the timelines, and these are all valid and legitimate concerns to have. And again, with AstraZeneca, frankly, it's been a lot of missteps from the company's point of view. And that's led to a lot of distrust in people just with the way the company has dealt with a lot of their information, the way that they've shared it. So they themselves have played a huge role in causing vaccine hesitancy. So we have to understand that there is a legitimate reason why people are worried and they're concerned and they're overwhelmed across the board. I mean, we're in a global pandemic. This is understandable. So we start from a place of compassion. We start from a place of respect. And we try and have these open dialogues and conversations with people, understand and explain the nuances in a balanced way without actually trying to make them feel like their opinion is invalid. I think that if you're dismissive of the fears, you're not going to instill confidence in anyone. And so that really is the first thing I would recommend people to do. So start from a place of compassion and respect. Have those really nuanced discussions and try and understand what are some of the key apprehensions people are having. So when you understand what their concerns are, you're actually able to address those concerns specifically. And so I think those are the two things that are really, really important.
Right. Let's acknowledge that people have many questions, that a lot of those questions can be valid, and that really talking down to people, minds don't change that way. It's about meeting people where they are.
Exactly that. And it's the same with NACI's recommendations. I think that if you actually read the entire 120-page report, you probably would have a much better understanding of what they're trying to say. However, some of their subsequent interviews have not necessarily explained this very well, and in fact have instead caused a lot of confusion.
So when we talk about transparency, I wanted to bring it back to NACI's statement, because to me it feels like a teachable moment in how complex scientific medical information is communicated. And, this conversation has me thinking about the gap between the intent or the content of health messaging and how the public hears it or understands it. Because again, most people are not reading that 100 pages of NACI statement. They are not doctors. So do you think that there is a gap in how these ideas are shared to, again, meet people where they are?
Absolutely. So here I think there's a twofold issue. So first of all, I think the public does not understand why policy changes so quickly. And the reason is because policy is always playing catch up to science. And during a pandemic, the science evolves really, really fast. So for the public, it seems like there's a lot of flip-flopping that's going on. When in fact, what we need to be explaining is that with more information, we change course. We are resilient during our pandemic. We change course based on new evidence coming up, and we're trying to educate and inform people as and when this new information is coming up. Second fold is you can have the best policies, but if you don't effectively communicate these, you're not actually reaching the people that you're trying to reach. And I'll give you an example. I think, early in the days when we were talking about mask mandates, the word mandate it has a really negative connotation to it. And people immediately went, towards the whole I'm being restricted, my freedoms are being restricted. And I just wonder, had we taken a more balanced approach instead, the mask will protect you, the mask will protect the people around you. And that simple change in language could have influenced a lot of behavioral, psychological changes in people. And so that is where effective communication is so incredibly important, and especially during a pandemic. Because again, there's so much information out there. People are bombarded with information constantly. In addition to that, there's a lot of misinformation out there that is intentionally trying to confuse people. And what we need to have is communication that leads people in a way that actually instills confidence. And so that is just so incredibly important at any time, but especially during a pandemic. And so I completely agree with you.
Right. In that the policy, of course, is important, but the messaging about that policy, in some ways, it's just as important because you're ultimately trying to get the public to buy into that policy. So how it's delivered crucially matters.
Absolutely does. And the way you do it is you communicate very clearly, you are very transparent about it, and you also allow that shared decision making with the people so that it doesn't come across as someone is just barking orders at you, and you explain why we're doing some of this, and instead of saying don't do this, you explain why we're asking people not to engage in this. And that understanding, the core understanding, and getting people to, like you said, buy into it is so fundamentally important in effective public health measures.
Sabina, I wonder if there's sort of a takeaway for people in how they can apply some of these techniques, or a way to suss out what is the best decision for them going forward. Because this week it's NACI, next week it could be a different piece of information that makes things unclear, as it has been throughout the pandemic. And, especially within media too, we're trying to fight that in terms of making that clear for people as well. So what kinds of recommendations could you give for people that the next time they see something that perhaps jogs what they think they know and it causes some confusion, what would you, especially around vaccines, what would you recommend for them?
I think the first thing I would tell people to do is speak to your family doctor. Family physicians are a wealth of information, and they especially know your personal situation and your personal history, and they can actually take that into account when they're trying to advise you what the best course of action for you would be. So absolutely, the first thing I would suggest people do is to speak to their family doctor. And the family doctor is also able to bring some of this information that, for instance, NACI is saying at a level where people can understand. As you said, first, no one reads 120 pages of a technical report. And even if you do read it, you're probably not going to understand it. It's very data heavy. It's very jargon heavy. And so how do you actually get these informations in a way that you can actually consume, in a way that you can understand, that is approachable? And your family doctor is perhaps one of the first places that you can go to. I think the other thing that I would also recommend people to do is look where you're getting your source of information from. And so that's really important because, the number of times I've received, I'll tell you, I live in a multi-gen housing. My father lives with me and we're South Asian. And so he gets all of his information from WhatsApp, and it's always through YouTube videos. And he'll come.
My parents too. Yeah.
Exactly. Right.
Totally.
And then he'll come to me and he will say, have you watched this YouTube video of this random person talking about this random, thing about vaccines that is completely untrue? And the first thing I ask him, so what's the source? He goes back and he looks at it and he's like, it's YouTube. And I'm like, interesting. And then it just makes him think about where he's getting his information from. And then having a trusted person that you can speak to about it, someone who's not dismissive, someone who actually takes the time to talk you through it, is really important, because that's the next step. And so look at your sources, see where the information is coming from, try and make sure that you're actually getting this from government health bodies, and try and find someone in your circle that you trust, a healthcare professional like your family doctor, to try and actually talk about all of these concerns that you can have, or the confusion, in fact, for what is the best course of action for you.
Sabina, thank you so much for taking the time to talk through this.
Oh, it's my pleasure. Thank you.
And that is Sabina Vohra-Miller, the founder of Unambiguous Science. You can find more information at unambiguous-science.com. That's it for today. Thanks for listening. This Matters is hosted and produced by me, Adrian Chung, Saba Aitazaz, and Raju Mutar. Produced and mixed by Sean Pattinen, and our director of programming is JP Fozo. Our show theme music is by So Called, and our episode music is by Mike DeAngelis. We want to hear what stories matter to you. Please send us comments, questions, or ideas to thismatters@thestar.ca. Please consider supporting the journalism the Toronto Star newsroom does at thestar.com. And don't forget to subscribe to This Matters on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you listen to your favorite podcasts. Let's talk soon.